This guy listed here as the #1 person on this indictment scammed the airlines for millions of dollars. And this guy obviously didn't do it alone. He built up an entire network, essentially a business, where they systematically went and scammed the airlines for millions of dollars. And it really surprised me what happened to him as a result of all this. According to the records, it was back in the early 2000s, which was back when the iPhone first started coming out, Facebook was relatively new, and this whole trend of FOMO, or fear of missing out, was really starting to take place. It's nothing like it is today, but at that time people were going on vacations and posting photos because now everybody had a phone that had a camera, and so there was all this feeling that people were going and doing things and they were posting on Facebook like they were living their lives. It's obviously not as extreme like it is now with Instagram and TikTok, but that was kind of the beginning of when all this started. So people were seeing people doing all these trips, and all of a sudden travel started to go up. But this was 2008, 2009, and the US was right in the middle of a recession. So people were not having a lot of money, but they also had that internal desire to not let their friends have a cooler vacation. And so this is what happened. Maurice, who was the first guy listed on the indictment, and his associates, who you're going to hear about more in a little bit, came up with this elaborate plan. Without any guns, these guys were going to commit a complicated white-collar crime and steal millions of dollars from the airlines and use unsuspecting people on both sides, and they were going to broker it out from the middle. According to some of the reports, Maurice worked with multiple sources along the black web to obtain stolen identity and credit card and debit card information. It's possible that you were part of the scam and didn't even know it, because it was very complex and elaborate. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, one of the main places where he went to go get this stolen credit card and debit card information was actually in Hanoi, Vietnam. And I've been to Vietnam and Hanoi and a few other places in Vietnam, and it's not like a place that strikes me as a place I would go in order to get stolen credit card and debit card information. But on all the different reports I read, they kept listing Hanoi, Vietnam as like a place that was associated with these guys of stealing thousands of people's credit card and debit card information. I don't know why Hanoi, but for some reason it kept being listed there. When it comes to international travel, staying connected shouldn't be complicated. That's why I partnered with Olafly to share in their new Olafly subscription plan, which is what I use so I can stay online as I move through multiple different countries around the world. With Olafly, you install one eSIM and you're covered in 160 different destinations. No roaming fees, no swapping your SIM card. It's really simple. Just fast, reliable internet everywhere you go. Now there's two plan options. I'm on the unlimited plan because a lot of times I'm not in the hotel when I'm international, so I'm on a plane or wherever I'm out moving around. For me, being able to have the unlimited plan is the best. But they also have this light plan, which is 25 gigabytes. So if you just really need to make a few calls, handle some emails, and just do light work and you're not needing that much data, there's also that option. There is no contract for these. They renew monthly, which means you can cancel at any time. Something that I just found out about actually is these subscriptions also include always on. That means you automatically get an extra gigabyte of data backup every month in over 70 different locations. So that way you're never left without a connection. The Ola plans are made for anyone who's always on the move, not just pilots or cabin crew, but people that like to work remotely or students that are backpacking between countries in Europe or happen to be working remotely in Asia. These Olafly plans allow you to keep sending messages back to your family so they all know that you're safe, as well as take photos and send those to your friends so they can know just how much cooler you are than they are. If you're planning a trip soon, check out the link in this description. They gave me this code on the screen, which gives you actually 10% off your monthly plan, and even more if you do an annual subscription. Anyway, I couldn't see if Maurice was actually traveling to Vietnam or just getting the information from Vietnam. It didn't really specify that, but his home base and his whole network was happening around the Chicago area. Several of the people that were named, including Tyrone Moss, Marcus Grisby, Benjamin Everett, Edwan Simmons, and among others, were listed as travel agents. And through social media and other ways, they were actually looking for people looking for that last minute travel. And anybody who's traveled last minute knows that sometimes those tickets are really expensive because there's only one seat left. But there are also cases, because I book almost all of my travel last minute because most of the time I'm on reserve and I don't really know where I'm going to go until a couple days before, and they say, oh, you're going to go here, and sometimes that's my base, and so I'm traveling there, and sometimes it's somewhere else on the other side of the globe, and so I need to quickly book a flight there. So a lot of times it can be really cheap, where you get, hey, there's a lot of open seats and the airlines want to sell those seats really cheap, so they're just trying to fill them up, because obviously flying a plane with empty seats isn't really good. But sometimes if it's the last seat, which I've also seen, it is crazy expensive. So these people looking for these last-minute tickets would reach out to the travel agents who were using these stolen credit cards and debit cards to actually purchase the airline tickets. And since at this time it was becoming normal for people to be using credit cards to purchase airline tickets through ticketing agencies, it wasn't showing up as any red flags, right? And these people, keep in mind, were traveling last minute. So you're not looking at your bank statement every single day, or at least I'm not. And so with these being last-minute ticket travel, these airlines were basically getting these tickets booked and the people were getting on the plane within a day or two, which is typically what I do. Which meant that the people who were doing the traveling were doing it on somebody's stolen credit card, and they were able to complete their travel before the person with the stolen credit card realized what had happened. Meanwhile, all these people who were doing the traveling were paying the travel agents and living these cool lives where they're going on all these trips and posting stuff on Facebook using their brand new iPhone, and they were posting all these pictures, and they thought they were just getting a deal because it was like a last minute travel thing. There was a bunch of empty seats, maybe because the recession was going on, and so they thought, oh, I got this great deal. Meanwhile, the reality was these travel agents were trying to get all these tickets booked because they were getting credit cards, booking a bunch of different people's travel on it that were traveling in very short order, and by doing that, those people were completing their travel and being able to get back to wherever they were before the people whose credit cards were being used realized what was going on. And the travel agents were getting the credit card money from the person who was doing the traveling, and that was going all into their pocket. Now, I read through this indictment and it didn't say it anywhere, but I suspect what they were telling the people is that they were selling these so cheap because the airlines were having issues filling these empty seats. And what's funny is that these people who were the travel agents, they were also feeling that they were missing out on all these other people doing traveling, so they ended up starting doing traveling on their own using other people's credit cards, including in 2008 when they flew themselves to Hawaii on fraudulently booked airline tickets to the Pro Bowl. And it didn't really say if they used those people's credit cards and debit cards to actually buy the tickets, but I'm guessing they probably didn't do that because that might have shown up as a red flag. That person would have got a call. They would have started asking them, hey, did you make this charge? Did you make this charge? Because if you ever had your credit card stolen, that's basically what happens is they keep calling you and they start going through a list of charges and you're like, I didn't make that, I didn't make that, I didn't make that. And that would have put them at suspicion of something going on. And then they could have got on to the person who was on that plane, figured out which ticket they were on and start asking them how did they buy that. But that never happened. So they had this elaborate scheme and the people were already completing the travel. How did they end up getting caught? And I'm gonna get into that in just a second here. But first you need to know who this guy is. This guy taught me something that all of you need to know. His name is Frank Abagnale, or at least that's how I pronounce it. I never had the opportunity to ask him how to pronounce his last name, but he was the original, one of the original airline scammers. You probably don't recognize him from that photo, but you might recognize him from this photo. This is Leonardo DiCaprio playing Frank, who actually was the person being portrayed in that movie, Catch Me If You Can. Now, coincidentally, Frank was at a hotel and he was staying at a hotel at the same time I was staying at a hotel when a friend of mine was also staying at that hotel. We were on a layover and he's like, oh, you're not going to believe who I ran into. And he got to take a photo with him and I didn't. A little bit disappointed, but anyway, Frank goes around the world giving speeches and telling people about how to prevent fraud, which is kind of ironic. So when you call your credit card company and you tell them, hey, I didn't make these charges, immediately, you might have to file a police report, it depends on the situation, but immediately what they'll do is they'll credit that money back. It'll take a day or so, and you'll have access to those things to be able to use that credit, and they'll start an investigation. Not a big deal, but that available credit becomes not your liability, not your bill to have to pay, and it's on them to start proving who stole or used that information, and then they'll give you a new credit card. Not a big deal. However, if those scammers, which they also got at that time, if they're able to get your debit card, it is a much more complicated system, which is one of the things that Frank teaches as he goes around and does different speeches about different things. Obviously, this isn't like the whole point of his speech, but I found it really interesting is he talks about the importance of not letting your debit card ever be used, because if a scammer gets a hold of your debit card and they get your cash out, it is a lot harder to recover that. So let's say you're going to use it to make your rent or your mortgage payment or your car payment. It's not as simple as like the bank go, oh, well here, let me give you this few $1,000s back. It doesn't work that way. not like a credit card. See, when you have a credit card, that credit card will actually reach out to the legal department of the airlines, and now it's between the airlines and the credit card for the airlines to prove that this was a legitimate transaction. And since in most cases they can't do that, the airlines have to end up eating that cost. That means they flew that person for free and gave them a bag of peanuts all for free, but not just free, it actually costs them money because they now have to give that money back to the credit card because the credit card's not going to eat that cost, and it's called a chargeback. So you as a person who had your credit card information stolen, let's just say I stole it and I went on this trip. That airline is now going to have to pay that cost back to the credit card company, so you're obviously not getting charged. I'm getting to travel for free, plus snacks, and the only person that's really getting the bad side of this is the airline themselves. And if you've seen some of my videos of just how thin the margins are when it comes to these airlines, and then you factor in potentially millions of dollars of theft happening, it can really hurt their bottom line. So just something I want you to know is that I never use my debit card, and I hope you never use your debit card after hearing about this. Just use your credit card everywhere you go and just spend whatever you can afford. Don't run a bunch of debt up, but use whatever you can afford, pay it off every month. You're not going to have any fees. And then if somebody does steal your credit card, you're not in one of these situations where someone has stolen your credit card so someone else could go on vacation and rob you and the airlines of millions of dollars. Just don't be that person. So now these guys are running this credit card fraud scheme and debit card scam. And if these unsuspecting passengers are already completing these flights, how did these bad guys get caught? Well, the airlines and the banks obviously started working together because there started to be this large uptick of transactions of these things that were happening with chargebacks, and they started going like, okay, this is a much bigger thing than just a casual random person got their credit card stolen. And then they started finding a pattern of all these things getting linked up about people traveling, short notice, certain travel agencies, and they started to kind of notice a pattern here that was going on because people get greedy. The Department of Justice actually released a note saying black market travel agents generally purchase reservations close to the time of departure, and as a result, their passengers could often complete their trip before the stolen credit or debit card used to pay for the flight was detected as being compromised. And what that meant was that the federal government was starting to get involved. The DEA, Secret Service, who don't just protect the president, they also do, the majority of actually what they do is financial stuff. So these agencies started to get involved, and now you're starting to talk about large dollar resources to get in and do investigations to find out what's going on. And obviously these people that were committing these crimes had no idea that this investigation was happening in the background. They discovered that over 2,000 sets of cards were likely getting authorized for multiple trips for different unsuspecting travelers. And once the government started noticing these different agencies having these patterns, obviously once these criminals start doing things, they want to just go for it as hard as they can. And once they started to see these patterns, it wasn't too hard for them to put everything else together. Now I'm going to make some assumptions here, and I don't know this to be the case, but something happened with Maurice which I found surprising. This document I found, which was labeled secret, showed all the people involved in the case. And you'll notice Maurice here, number one at the list. When you scroll down, it starts to show the maximum punishments if convicted of their crimes. Maurice here was looking at no more than 5 years. So here was the mastermind. He's involved in stealing $20 million is what it said on there. And in my experience, the government's going to round down as to things that they can actually prove, which means there's probably a bunch of stuff that they couldn't prove. And so they're saying that he's looking at a potential maximum of 5 years for doing $20 million of known and organizing over $20 million of known theft. That's roughly $4 million a year. That seems like not a bad salary. Now, of course, he was ordered to pay restitution, which basically means that he has to pay some of that back, but it doesn't really list the actual number. But look at some of the other people that were involved in this. This guy's got a $1.7 million fine and potentially 56 years. Same for Grisby here. Others like Simmons were looking at only $1 million fine and 27 years. So I'm going to make this assumption that something had happened, that this guy was able to mastermind all this stuff, but then he had very restricted penalties and then didn't seem to have nearly as bad of a situation as these other people, despite apparently, according to these reports, masterminding it. Otherwise, why do you end up number one on the indictment? So I'm not going to say what I think he did while he was in there talking with the different police to allow him to get a smaller penalty than some of these other people. I'll leave that for you to decide. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.